Hello, school counselor. Welcome back to another week of the School for School Counselors podcast. I am so glad that you're back here with me. I'm Steph Johnson, founder of School for School Counselors. So excited to sit and visit with you this week on something that I think is really overlooked in our field, and quite frankly, something that we should be talking more about. But it's also something I can say I don't think I've ever heard anybody mention throughout my school counseling journey. And I think it could be the single most important skill that you could develop to not only survive, but thrive in your career as a school counselor. Can you guess what it might be? Insert the Jeopardy music, right? Well, I bet out of all of the things you thought about, you didn't guess self-compassion. That seems like kind of a silly thing to be talking about when we think about all of the really, big, important, stressful things going on in our school counseling worlds. But I promise you, the research shows us that self-compassion is vital if you want to endure in this career for any amount of time. Self-compassion is the ability to view yourself with kindness and in a non-judgmental manner. It's honoring and accepting the fact that you're human, that you have shortcomings, and sometimes you make mistakes and things don't work out perfectly, and that's okay. Research shows us that self-compassionate people have higher levels of psychological well-being. They experience higher life satisfaction. They have better mental health outcomes with lower levels of depression, lower levels of self-evaluative anxiety, less rumination, less negative affect. And folks with self-compassion have more favorable attitudes toward help-seeking. There are three major components to self-compassion. One is focusing on self-kindness instead of self-judgment. We have to learn how to be warm and understanding towards ourselves. In our culture, that is sometimes difficult to do, right? When we feel like things aren't going right, we tend to want to fight against our reality. And then when we fight, our suffering increases. If you guys practice mindfulness, you know what I'm talking about, right? The more you push back, the more pressure you feel. And so the point really is just to be kind to yourself in that moment. If things aren't going the way you planned for them to go, if they didn't work out the way you wanted them to, if you didn't quite make the grade, you've got to be able to develop the ability to be kind to yourself instead of judging yourself. The second component to self-compassion is recognizing our common humanity versus isolating ourselves. We've got to understand that we all suffer. We all make mistakes. We all fall short. And my friends, this is just part of our shared human experience. This is just part of being alive and in the world and doing good work. Sometimes things aren't always going to be what we want them to be. But if we can recognize that common humanity, if we can eliminate the isolation that we create for ourselves in self-deprecation, we're going to be better off. And we've also got to recognize that as part of this shared human experience, sometimes, pardon my language, shit happens, right? Sometimes there's nothing to be done to change the outcome. Sometimes it's just going to be what it's going to be. And recognizing that fact is going to help us hold compassion for ourselves and not berate ourselves until the end of time that we couldn't force an outcome. Does that make sense? The third component to self-compassion, and it's one that I kind of briefly suggested earlier, is mindfulness versus over-identification. That is being able to recognize what is true in the moment, then letting it go, instead of forming an identity around our failures or forming an identity around our shortcomings or around our challenges. My friends, I see that a lot in our field. I see that with a lot of people wanting to over-identify with their challenges. And then that becomes part of their identity. Let me give you an example. I can never be a rock star school counselor because I have a caseload of 800 students. You ever heard anybody say that? See that a lot in social media, don't we? We convince ourselves that these kinds of limitations are part of this, and they become part of our identity, and that's not a good thing. I can never be a rock star school counselor because I'm given too many non-counseling duties, right? But instead of just acknowledging, yes, that is a fact, that's where I stand at this moment, people begin to over-identify with that. I'm a school counselor who will never be able to completely fulfill my role. We convince ourselves that these limitations are part of our own identity, and instead of being compassionate toward ourselves and being mindful of how we feel about those things in the moment, we're analyzing, we're over-identifying, we're making excuses, we're fighting the reality. And that makes us tired. That makes us sad. That makes us frustrated, feeling burned out, right? We've got to understand that we may not be able to do all the things we want to do in light of these limitations. We may need to recognize the fact that we may not be as motivated to reach our goals with a huge caseload, right? It's demotivating us. There are lots of things that go into this. So just being mindful about our situations and not over-identifying with the challenges is going to be so important. Here's the thing, though. We can talk all day about self-compassion, how it benefits us, what things should we be doing, how should we be looking at the world and at ourselves. But the real truth of it is, many of us operate in environments that are teeming with judgment, that are overflowing with criticism or skepticism, not only towards us as school counselors, but perhaps all the people on your campus. Campuses at large are heavily invested with accountability. We're always looking at test scores. We're constantly looking at what the numbers are telling us. And then we're subject to criticism and judgment from our families, from the parents of our students, from the community at large. Are we doing enough? Are we handling things the right way? Did we say the right thing? Did we do the right thing? Did we respond quickly enough? Right? Those are coming at us all the time. Those are all judgments. And then sometimes we also face judgment and criticism from principals. You know, nothing for nothing, education has changed quite a bit. We've experienced a big shift since COVID, and unless you have an administrator that's really in tune with those changes, it might be difficult to see eye to eye. And personally, as school counselors, we're also hit with this kind of judgment and criticism through this big advocacy push in school counseling. This big push that's convincing us that we need to be the only people on our campuses that track every minute of every single day, and that data should be placed under scrutiny so that other people can judge our worthiness of being on campus. Now, that's not the way that everybody sees it, but that's the way a lot of folks see it. And that can feel very judgmental, right? When you're collecting that use of time data, it can feel like you're under the microscope. I can say that because I've been there. I often go back there. And so it's hard to maintain self-compassion with all of these stresses pushing down on us, right? With all of this pressure building from expectation, it's hard to remember to give compassion to ourselves. That's really interesting too, because the way that we're approaching ourselves in these situations is exactly the opposite of how we would advise our students on talking to themselves. It's really important that we start to talk to ourselves and treat ourselves the way we would like to see students treat themselves, right? Those same skills. It's going to help our longevity in the field. It's going to help us feel more fulfilled. And it's going to make us feel like we're making the difference in school counseling that we want to make. Now, here's the caveat. Many of our colleagues, and maybe you, might initially discount the importance of self-compassion. Especially if you're a go-getter. You might feel like you don't have enough time. You have to prove yourself. You don't have time to be kind to yourself because there's so much that has to be done. It's always go, 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 overcome, adapt. Let's go, let's push, let's make things happen. And that's the way many of our campuses operate. It reinforces that for us. So we feel like we don't have time to be mindful and intentional about how we talk to ourselves or how we perceive ourselves. And so sometimes if that describes you, you're going to avoid self-compassion because it feels like laziness, right? If you're that driven, that goal-oriented, it feels like either laziness or sometimes making excuses. But my friends, self-compassion is neither one of those things. It is going to be vital to your success. And so if you're one of those super driven personalities, and I can attest to this, you're going to have to remain mindful of your self-compassion. And I'm saying this as much for your benefit as I am my own. Individuals with low self-esteem can also have a hard time with the idea of self-compassion. Depending on the kind of campus environment you work in, you might be too scared to even think about caring for yourself. Feeling like you have to go, go, go all the time, not because you want to, but because you have to. These are the campuses where people are asking to see copies of your schedules. Or maybe they're scheduling your day for you, where you get second guessed all the time. And you feel like you don't even have 5 minutes in your day to stop and catch your breath. That's a really dangerous place to be. And so you are going to have to find some time and some intentionality for your own good, or you're going to burn out. So what are some ways that we can build our own capability for self-compassion? What are some ways that we can really hone those skills, really lean into that compassion for ourselves? Number one, we have to be intentional about comforting our bodies, eating healthy food, making sure that we find time for rest. Even when you're go, 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 go at work, taking a second to massage your neck or your hands, taking a quick walk out on the playground. All of those things can help bring you back to yourself and help you with your self-compassion efforts. I work with many people who enjoy taking a portion of their lunch break to walk around our campus building. It helps them clear their mind, they get outdoors, they get their body moving, and they're able to better reconnect with themselves. I think that's an awesome, awesome idea, and I wish I saw more folks doing that. It just brings you back to yourself and reminds you you are a living, breathing, moving, compassionate human being. And I don't know about you, but I tend to think better when I'm in motion. Number two, and by the way, these are not my suggestions. These come from Harvard Medical School. All right, we'll have a link in our show notes to that if you want to go back and read their full article. Second, write a letter to yourself, either about a situation that's affecting you now, something that you're trying to figure out, something you're working through, something you don't like, or write a letter just to give yourself some overall kudos. But you're going to write this letter as a compassionate friend. You're going to write this letter to remind yourself what you need to do to care for yourself. I've noticed you haven't been yourself lately, Steph. I'm wondering if you've been taking enough time to eat healthy foods at lunchtime. Have you been taking a lunch break? Do you realize that you need to nourish yourself in order to sustain your pace? See how that works? I'm just talking to myself like I would talk to my bestie. Letting her know that I love her, I care about her, and I want to see her taking care of herself. Third, and sort of related to that, is encouraging yourself. Talking to yourself like you talk to your best friend, or even like you talk to your favorite student. It sounds so simple, but really, how often do you stop to do that? Right? As we run, as we're under these microscopes of criticism and we have all these expectations piling up and we're trying to do so much with so little, it's easy to criticize yourself. It's easy to tell yourself that you're not hitting the mark, you're not making the goal, you're not at the target. But how often do you really stop and say, hey, you know what? Great job. I'm really proud of you. You pushed through that. This sucks right now, but you're going to make it out the other side. And look at how gracious you were when you handled the situation. Y'all, all those things are so important to hear. And I'll bet it wouldn't be hard at all to say something like that to a coworker or to a friend. We've got to do it for ourselves. If writing a letter, journaling, things like that aren't your jam, try some mirror work. There's a study out there that shows greater effects when folks recited complimentary phrases in a mirror versus just reciting them out loud to themselves. Isn't that interesting? There's something about saying it in the mirror, doing some mirror work, that really makes that message hit home in our brains. So give yourself some affirmations in the morning. All right? Be like that, what is that Saturday Night Live character? I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me, right? I don't remember, is that what he said? But have some affirmations for yourself. Talk to yourself, look yourself in the eye, and remind yourself how awesome you are. Because you are. Anybody who does this work day in and day out and continues to volunteer to walk through the door is awesome. And the last suggestion for cultivating some self-compassion is, and you guessed it, practicing mindfulness. I talk about this all the time, but it's so important for us to remain mindful and in the moment so we can detach the judgment in situations from ourselves. And what's interesting is, as you get better at this, as you're better able to detach yourself from the judgment in situations and really give yourself self-compassion, you'll be able to better perform those skills with your students. If they're escalated, if their behavior is off the charts, if they're shouting, screaming, yelling, doing all the things, you're going to be able to remain centered and grounded more easily. You're going to have the next steps in mind more handily than someone who cannot detach. Chris Gierma is a clinical psychologist at the Harvard Medical School. He says that self-compassion is a team sport. Here's a quote from him. He says, "When we see others meeting some of the obstacles that we have and how they overcame them, we are better able to do the same." And y'all, I think that's really important. You know, we can talk about cultivating self-compassion all day long, but it's often like this mindfulness conversation. It's something that sounds like a great idea, but it's a little bit harder to implement in real life than we anticipate. And something that can usually fall by the wayside, right? We start with good intentions. We want to make these changes, but there's just not enough driving it to make the habit stick. So what are we going to do then? We've got to engage in this self-compassion journey as a team sport. Just like Chris Kermer says, one of the ways you can do that is through supportive consultation. As you're able to talk through your concerns in your professional life, all the things that you're encountering, the situations that are making you feel like you don't have what it takes, your consultation team can talk you through it. They can lead you through the thought process for self-compassion as they help you troubleshoot the problem at the same time. That's a really super cool process. And I remind you of this all the time, but I want you to know because I don't want you to miss out if you need it. We do this every week in our School for School Counselors Mastermind. We meet weekly not only to engage in case consultation, but also to build each other up, to encourage one another and help develop these skills for self-compassion so that we can go back in the school building feeling empowered, feeling confident, and feeling like we have what it takes, even when things aren't going exactly right. It's hard to find a consultation group that has that ability. So often they turn into venting sessions, right? Unproductive conversations or random pieces of advice getting thrown out. I mean, if you're interested in feeling more fulfilled in your profession, I encourage you, come check out our School for School Counselors Mastermind for a little bit. See if you like it. See if you think it is what you think it is. Because we know once you get in there, you're going to love being in there. You can find out all the details at schoolforschoolcounselors.com/mastermind. Go check it out and let us know what you think. And if you hate it, man, you just tell me and we'll get you right back out. It's no big deal. All right, before I go, I want to give you one quick exercise to really dive a little deeper into this idea of self-compassion. This exercise is identifying personal rules. Your personal rules are the rules that you think of automatically. Some people would equate them with automatic negative thoughts, ruminations, those kinds of things. Things like, I should be meeting an 80-20 ratio in my program. I should be trying to achieve ramp status. I should not be spending so much time doing paperwork. I should be spending more time with students. I should be the go-to person on campus for student mental health. Those kinds of thoughts, all right? And while they're admirable, they're not serving you when they're resulting in feelings of shame or feelings of stress. These thoughts can be goals for sure, but they shouldn't be the rules for our daily work. Do you see the difference? When we're shooting toward that goal, it's not completely dependent on us, right? It's not our identity. But when we translate that into a rule in our life, all of a sudden it gets way more personal and not always in a positive way. So you've got to identify your rules. What are the rules that you've been living by or working within? With thoughts like, I should, I must, I can't. All those words are going to cue you to recognize that this is a rule you've made up for yourself. Take a week or so and just try to be mindful. Try to be aware and cognizant of these unspoken rules that you've created for yourself. And then you've got to analyze them. After you've collected them for a week, think about, how rigidly are you applying these rules to your life? Scale them. Give yourself an internal scaling question. 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, and then decide, how important is this rule to you? As a person, as a human being, as a helper? Is it contributing to your well-being? Do you feel supported when you think about this rule that you've made for yourself? Do you feel understood? Do you feel like it's a rule that keeps you on track and motivated? Or do you feel like it's a rule that breaks you down? Is it helping you grow toward your goals in a healthy and a satisfying way? Answer that for yourself. So first, you're identifying the rules you've made for yourself, and then you're analyzing them. And then after that, break them. Break them. Just get rid of the rule that you've created for yourself. Figure out which one feels the absolute worst to you, which one feels the most negative, which one is bringing you down, and identify how's it holding you back, And how can you challenge it? For instance, I should be teaching more lessons to my students. Challenge that. What if you come to terms with the fact that your scheduling just doesn't allow you any flexibility? What if you decide it doesn't matter how many lessons you're teaching to your students if you're available to be there for students in need? What if you worked under that rule and consciously corrected yourself for 1 or 2 weeks? Then reflect back on what happened and see, how did you feel about your work and how did your thoughts change? Then you can decide how rigidly you want to apply this rule in the future. It may not be that you need to get rid of the rule completely, but does it need to change? Does it need to be less intense? It's so important for us to be able to reflect on those things. So I'm going to challenge you this week to identify a personal rule that you've made for yourself that does not feel satisfying. Just reflect on it. Notice the ways in which you present this rule to yourself that may not be helpful. And as you do it, talk to yourself like you're your best friend. Y'all, we see the worst of our students. We hear the worst stories. We encounter some of the hardest things. And a lot of people, quite frankly, don't have the stamina to do what you do every single day. They just don't. And that's no knock against them. Just some hearts are made to do this work and some are not. But because you were made to do the school counseling work, it is so very important that in the middle of taking care of all of your students, that you also remember to take care of yourself. And cultivating your skills for self-compassion can go so far in helping you feel fulfilled, helping you feel confident, and helping you truly feel like you were made to do this job. We need more folks like you in our schools. If you need some support as you walk through your self-compassion journey, because if you're like me, this does not come naturally. It's a lot easier for me to criticize myself than it is for me to be kind. If you need to work on that like I do, come join us. We'll be happy to talk you through that in the School for School Counselors Mastermind. We want to be there with you. All right, my friend, I'll be back soon with another episode. This one was kind of deep and intense, so we'll try to keep it lighter next time, but keep listening. And until then, I hope you have the best week. Take care of yourself through self-compassion. See you soon.